Right now, you are in prison. Not the kind with bars, the kind you built yourself out of one quiet assumption about who you are and what your life is allowed to be. And you've been sleeping inside that prison every single night without ever even noticing. Neville called the way out of this prison the law of liberty. And almost everyone who studies him reads right past this because it sounds like a pretty phrase and not what it actually is. What it actually is, a precise instruction. The most precise one he ever gave, in fact. And by the end of this video, you're going to know how to use it on purpose, on the situation, the one situation in your life that feels like it has no door. If you're new here, hello, I am your Muse Traci. Welcome to the channel. I am so happy that you're here. On this channel, I help you unlock the power you already have. You are literally born with it, but can't access. I help you break through where years of trying has failed. And the biggest hurdle of all, I help you go from intellectually knowing the law to permanently embodying it. In other words, actually being able to use it. If that sounds good to you, you are more than welcome to join me here, subscribe to the channel, stick around for a while and learn. The whole mission here is for you to learn what it actually takes to master conscious manifestation, consciously creating your reality. So let's talk about what the law of liberty really is. When Neville talked about rearranging the mind, he started with something very simple, very, easy to understand. He said, take a piece of steel that's magnetized and put it next to a piece of steel that isn't magnetized. And notice that they do not differ in substance, not at all. The only difference between the two pieces of steel is the arrangement of the molecules inside. One has molecules arranged in such a way that creates magnetism, and the other has the molecules arranged in a way that does not create magnetism. Then he says, the rich man, the poor man, the beggar, the thief, they are not different minds. They are different arrangements of the same mind. So let that sink in for a moment. What he's saying is there is only one mind. One, the person you envy and the person you pity are running with the same equipment, so to speak. Again, it's the same mind. The only thing that changed is how the structure got arranged. And you arranged yours. Maybe not on purpose, maybe not consciously up to this point, but still you did. You arranged your mind. Beliefs are a choice. So when you look at your circumstances and feel that heaviness, that this is just how it is for me, I'm wondering if you've actually noticed that you're not looking at a fixed reality, actually. You're looking at an arrangement. And anything that was arranged can also be rearranged. And now here's where the law of liberty comes in. Neville pulled it straight out of the book of James. James says, be doers of the word and not hearers only. Because the hearer, he says, is like a man who looks at his own face in the mirror and then walks away and immediately forgets what he looks like. But the one who looks into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and perseveres in it, that one is blessed in his doing. So what does that actually mean? What is all of this, funny talk that Neville spoke in a lot of times that is hard to understand at first? What does it all actually mean? What does it mean to look into the law of liberty? It means you look into your own mind. You're imprisoned by some current fact. Maybe it's money. Maybe it's a relationship. Maybe it's a circumstance someone else seems to be in control of. And instead of accepting that sentence, instead of agreeing to serve the time, you look into your mind and you dare to assume that you are already free. That's it. That's why I'm saying deceptively simple, right? But that's the law of liberty. The law of assumption is the law of liberty. They're the same thing, two different names. You select the assumption that sets you free, and you refuse the one that keeps you limited and locked in to whatever it is that you don't prefer. And notice what Neville says that you do not do. You do not ask who's going to bring it about. You do not figure out the how. You do not look around for permission. You look into the perfect law of liberty. You assume you are free. And then comes the part that everybody struggles with. You persevere when there's no evidence. You persevere when there's opposite evidence. You persevere. How long? That's another question. How long? How long should I persevere? You persevere until what you assumed to be true is externalized. There is no set time. There is no, well, your manifestation should show up in a week, or it should show up in a month, or it should show up. I mean, yes, it doesn't need to take a long time, but that's not your concern, okay? And the more you focus on time, the more time expands. So let's not focus on time. Time is doubt anyway, I like to say. Time is doubt. Focusing on time is really your mind doubting. So leave time out of it. It's not about how long you persist. It is just that you persist. Again, whether there's any evidence or even if there is opposite evidence. So let me tell you a little bit about Neville's own story, because this is where it stops being just a concept and becomes something you can take and apply to yourself and any situation right now, immediately. You don't need to wait for a future time. So Neville gets drafted into the army, and this isn't a 5 or 10 year sentence with good behavior, as an option to leave early, possibly. No, he's drafted for the duration of the war with no end date, no release, 17 million men all getting drafted in. And Neville, being honest with himself, he says he doesn't want any part of it. He doesn't argue with anyone. He doesn't tell his captain why. He doesn't run away. He simply does the inner work. He looks into the law of liberty, and he assumes that he is already out. He's already back home in New York. So that night, sleeping in the barracks with 25 men around him, clearly he was still there. The evidence all shows that he was still there. He does not actually sleep in his mind in the barracks. In his imagination, he's home in his own apartment on Washington Square, his own bed, his wife in her bed, his little girl in the crib in the corner. He walks through the whole apartment with his imaginary hands and touches the objects. He feels it all real. He uses his imagination to be there, and he falls asleep there in his own home, 1,000 miles away from where he actually was in the army, laying on a cot. His body is actually there, but in his imagination, he was in his own home. Then he made his application to be released through all the normal channels. He calls it the world of Caesar. You have to do things in the world of Caesar, right? So you have to let someone know that you want out because, again, he calls it the world of Caesar, which just means the physical world, the 3D world. And so he put his application in, and within 24 hours, it came back to him with one word: disapproved. And it was signed by his colonel. Now, watch what he does with that. He didn't protest. He didn't, argue. He did nothing. He says nothing. He doesn't argue. But he also does not accept the verdict of the outer world. What does he do? He goes within. He goes right back to the law of liberty. He sleeps again that night as a free man in his own home. And at 4 a.m, a hand appears before him holding a pen, and it scratches out the word, disapproved, and writes in bold script, approved. He hears a voice: that which I have done, do nothing. Right? So Neville fell asleep, and, maybe he was dreaming, maybe it was divine communication. Who knows? But he heard the words. Well, he saw in his mind, scratched out, disapproved, and it was written approved. And then the voice said, I've done what I've done, do nothing, right? So the voice is sort of telling him like, it's approved. You don't need to do anything, just persist. Then 9 days later, that same colonel calls him in and gives him every reason in the world why he should stay in the army. And 9 times Neville quietly says, yes, sir, I still want out. Yes, sir, I still want out. Until the colonel runs out of reasons and tells him to bring in a new application. And that very day, Neville was honorably discharged. He didn't escape. He didn't run away. He was released from the duration of the war. Now, I want to pull out the thing that actually did the work, because it wasn't his imagination alone. And this is what, again, so many people get wrong. It was his perseverance through opposite. The first application said disapproved. No way, no way, no way. When that paper came back, stamped disapproved, the outer world, gave him every reason to go back on his own assumption. It gave him every reason to believe that he was not powerful and that he couldn't actually create what he wanted just because he imagined it. But of course, by this time, he knew better. He had already been mentored by Abdullah. He had already been trained and conditioned to ignore the evidences of his senses. And he simply persevered when there was opposite evidence right in front of his face. He didn't give up. He didn't give in to the circumstances. He looked again into the law of liberty. And again, he slept in the end again, even when the facts said no. This is the part I see people miss constantly. So let me make it plain. Neville said, if I call you now and you answer, will you still answer an hour later to the same call? So what he's saying by that is, like, if you make an assumption right now, in an hour, are you still persisting in your assumption? And you can take this like further out, in a day, in a week, in a month, in a year. Are you still persisting? Again, things don't need to take a long time. But again, we're leaving time out of it. You can put any vague time on it. So you made your decision, you made your assumption. If sometime in the future you are, checking back in, at any time in the future, are you still holding the assumption, right? If you assume you are the person you want to be right now, are you still assuming it an hour from now? Because if you're not, you're the hearer who looked in the mirror and forgot his own face. You're the hearer of the word, not the doer of the word. The doer persists. The doer perseveres. So I want you to ask yourself this honestly. When you do your inner work and then 10 minutes later, you're back to worry, back in checking, but how? What are you actually doing? You looked into the perfect law of liberty and walked back into the prison and locked the door behind yourself. Neville had a name for that, turning back. He called it Lot's wife, the pillar of salt. Salt was how they preserved things back in the day. So they didn't have a lot of refrigeration options. So if they needed to preserve something, they salted it. Okay, so salt is a metaphor for preserving. So when you turn back towards the state you said you were leaving, and you don't just visit it, you get preserved in it. You salt yourself into the very thing you wanted to walk away from. You're imprisoned once again. You are once again in prison, not the one behind bars, the one created in your own mind. So take a moment with that. Pause the video if you need to, because I think for a lot of you, that's the whole game right there. Not that you don't know how to assume. You do. Of course you do. It's that you just keep turning back. And there's one more thing he warned about with this, and it's the quietest, kind of most insidious thing that, again, I see a lot of people struggling with, a lot of people doing, and he calls it the double-minded man. Again, in James, it says, the double-minded man, unstable in all his ways, should not think he'll receive anything. What do you actually want? Not the 10 backup options, not the version you'd settle for, the thing. Because you cannot assume your way into a state you haven't even allowed yourself to choose yet. So let me bring this all the way home to you and your situation then, the real one. The one you thought about when I said in the beginning you're in prison. I want you to get clear on what freedom in that situation actually looks like. Not a vague solution, not everything works out, specific. If it were already done, where would you be now? What would you be feeling? What would you no longer be carrying? as a rule, as a limitation. Then you're going to look into the law of liberty. You're going to dare to assume you are already that free person. And the facts are going to argue with you. The facts, the current facts. The disapprove stamp is going to show up, and you let it. Say nothing back to it. You're not accepting it. You're not fighting it. You are going right back to the end. And then you're going to persevere. And an hour later, still assuming. Tomorrow, when the circumstances haven't moved yet, still assuming. You are not becoming free. You are already free. You're remembering that you are free. And you are refusing to turn back and to salt yourself in the old reality. Neville said it himself, let the weak man say, I am strong. He didn't say, let the weak man say, I am trying to be. No, he didn't say, I hope to be. No, he said, I am. Let the weak man claim now he is what he wants to be. You have the same mind that runs every other person's life that you've ever looked up to or even envied. Same equipment, same mind. You just get to rearrange it now. You get to rearrange your own mind. This is your birthright. You don't need to wait for permission. You don't need to wait for evidence. You don't need to wait for anything. Do it now. And the door out of every prison you're in is in the assumption you're willing to select and refuse to abandon. So if this is the work you know you're ready to actually do, not just understand intellectually, but to embody, that's exactly what I do with my clients one-on-one. And if that's what you're ready for, I'd love to work with you. You can click the link down in the description and in the pinned comment where you can book a free one-on-one call with me to see if we're a good fit to work together and see how we can use the law of liberty in your own life to set you free, get you out of prison, whatever prison you might think that you're in right now. Thank you all so much for being here and watching this one. I appreciate every single one of you. See you in the next one.